Melissa Tremblay was born in March 1977 in the American city of Lawrence, Massachusetts. When she was a month old, her biological parents gave the girl up for adoption. Her new parents were Janet and Robert Tremblay in a town called Salem. She was a very energetic child, interested in fashion and singing, and loved to read since childhood. At school the girl had many friends, and after school she spent a lot of time in an organization similar to the Boy Scouts, only for all children. When she was 9 years old, her adoptive parents divorced, and since then Melissa's father has had virtually no involvement in his daughter's life. Some time later, her mother began dating another man named Robert, but he did not live with them. On September 11, 1988, when Melissa was 11 years old, she and her mother went to Lawrence, where the woman was supposed to meet Robert. They regularly hung out at a local bar, and Janet often took her daughter with her because she had no one to leave her with. Usually her mother let Melissa go for a walk outside because the girl was bored sitting with them. Janet told her not to wander too far, and Melissa spent time on the neighboring streets. Due to the fact that her mother went to this bar quite often, the girl managed to make friends with other children who lived nearby, and she often walked with them. Melissa spent most of her time outside that day. During one of these visits, the bartender made her popcorn, and the girl said she would be back soon for it. However, she never came back to the bar. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, her mother began to worry because Melissa had not been seen for quite some time. She went outside and looked into her car, but her daughter was nowhere to be found. Then she and Robert went to look for her, going around one street after another, but they could not find the girl. They went around this for 5 hours, and around 9 p.m. Janet decided to go to the police. Officers immediately joined the search, but they were also unable to find the girl. At that time it was already dark, which greatly complicated their task, but the police continued to look for Melissa until late at night. They also considered the possibility that the girl had decided to run away, but her mother insisted that Melissa was afraid of the dark and didn't like being alone, so she would never have run away. The next day, the girl's whereabouts still remained unknown, and the search for her continued. This continued until about 3 p.m., when a railroad employee called the police. He was making a routine round of the old railway junction, which was only a few hundred meters from the bar. The junction was quite large, and at its widest point there were 8 tracks. However, many of them have not been used for a long time. There were empty freight cars standing there, and between 2 such cars, a worker noticed something strange. As he got closer, he realized that there was a human body in front of him and called the police. Detectives who arrived at the scene quickly realized that it was Melissa Tremblay. In addition to the fact that they had been looking for her since the previous evening, in her purse next to her body there was a card from a children's organization with her name on it. The body lay on the tracks that was still in use, and one leg was severed from it. Detectives knew it was most likely the result of a train collision since that particular stretch of road was still in use. However, they immediately questioned whether this was the cause of death. The chief detective immediately noticed several points that ran counter to this version. Firstly, her purse, where they found a card with Melissa's name, was lying almost 20 meters from that place, which seemed strange. If the cause of death was an accident on the tracks, then it was unlikely that she could have been so far away. Secondly, the detective noticed a large accumulation of footprints on the ground near the purse, as well as drops of blood. This led him to believe that Melissa might have been the victim of an attack, and it all happened at this very place, after which an unknown criminal dragged her along the path. Perhaps he was hoping to make it look like the victim had died in a train accident. Another factor that suggested a crime was the location itself. The dozens of empty carriages at the railway junction were popular with people without a place to live and those looking for a secluded place to consume illicit substances. Therefore, the detective admitted that one of them could have attacked the girl. Her body was handed over to medical experts, and police began searching for clues at the scene of discovery. Melissa found no evidence, so investigators focused on finding witnesses to try to reconstruct the chronology of events. The first thing they did was talk to one of the railroad company employees. He said that on the day the body was discovered, he noticed a girl near the tracks who matched Melissa's description. He told her to immediately leave the railway because it was not safe for children to walk here, and she left the area. Next, the police found a woman who lived not far from the bar. She said she had known Melissa for many months. Her children made friends with her on the street, and the girl often came to visit them. That day, Melissa also came to their house to ask her children to go out, but the woman said they were busy and did not let them go. In the end, Melissa left there alone. Investigators soon found another witness, who shared their first significant tip. He said that he saw a girl similar to Melissa. According to him, she was standing next to a van at an intersection near the railway junction and talking to the driver. The witness described the man as quite large, unpleasant, and about 30 years old. He had dark hair and a large beard. As for the van, it was brown, old and covered in rust. The police admitted that this man might be related to the murder, so they began to look for similar cars. Meanwhile, medical experts completed work on the body and confirmed that the cause of death was not the train. On the victim's body they found many abrasions and 3 stab wounds, which became fatal. No traces of abuse were found, nor were any other biological samples on the body or clothing. At the same time, experts determined that the puncture wounds were inflicted with the left hand, which means that the criminal was most likely left-handed. Thus, this case was reclassified as a search for the culprit. However, they had only one clue, a description of the van near which the girl was seen shortly before her disappearance. The police focused on searching for similar cars, but time after time they came to a dead end. The problem was that it would be almost impossible to link the van and its owner to the murder without a confession. DNA testing was not yet used in those years, and there should not have been any additional evidence, for example, Melissa's belongings or prints in this van. The police also tried to find new witnesses. They interviewed several hundred residents of the area, but this did not bear any fruit. Detectives continued to search for the van and other leads for several months, but the case eventually went cold. Melissa's murder was also heavily covered in the media, and many people began blaming her mother for the incident. People were outraged by the fact that a woman would let an 11-year-old girl go near such an unsafe place as a half-forgotten place, music. Rumors also began to spread that Janet had problems with alcohol after her divorce from her husband, and she was unable to cope with her parental responsibilities. Due to this, people began to blame social services for failing Melissa by not intervening in the situation. Amid all these accusations, Janet herself refused to contact journalists and answer their questions. When they contacted the guardianship service, they said that they were aware of the problematic situation in their family and tried to take some measures, but the issue of depriving Janet of parental rights was not considered. Since then there has been no progress in this matter. The police reviewed possible suspects over and over again, but this did not bring any results. In 2000, 12 years after the murder, investigators had their first serious suspect, Tommy Lynn Sells, whom I already talked about in one of the videos I will leave a link to in the description. Investigators in Melissa's case found that the handwriting of many of his crimes matched the details of this murder quite closely. Moreover, Tommy looked like the driver of the van, next to whom the girl was seen, and he also quite often spent the night in empty carriages when he traveled to different states. Detectives in the Melissa case began looking into his possible involvement, but ultimately concluded that he was unlikely to be involved. They had no evidence that Tommy might have been around Lawrence at the time. Instead, they concluded that he was in another state during those months. Since then, this case has remained frozen for several more years, until in 2013 detectives, quite by accident, stumbled upon a new lead. They arrested a Lawrence man on an unrelated case, and during questioning, he suddenly announced that he knew some details about Melissa's murder. The man said that in 1988, when he was 13 years old, he stole cars. The guy spent time on the street looking for suitable cars, and on the day of Melissa's disappearance he saw a similar girl. According to him, she was sitting on the steps of the bar, and next to her was a man named Mike. The witness knew him, but the man had a rather dubious reputation, and the guy's relatives told him to stay away from him. The guy passed by, and about 10 minutes later, returning back, he saw Melissa leaving the bar with Mike. At some point, another man, whom the witness did not know, approached them, and the three of them continued to walk somewhere. The police asked the witness why he had remained silent for 25 years, and he replied that he did not want to have further contact with the police. However, when he learned about Melissa's murder and realized that he had seen a similar girl, the guy asked his brother if he should tell someone about it, but he advised him to remain silent. However, detectives immediately found one serious contradiction in this story. According to the witness, he saw the girl on the steps of the bar when it was already dark outside, and they started looking for Melissa at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when it was not even dark and it was light. Considering that all the patrons and employees of the bar knew about the girl's disappearance, and her mother had already been looking for Melissa on the street for several hours, detectives considered it extremely unlikely that she could be near the entrance to the bar and go unnoticed. Thus, the police admitted that either the witness simply saw some other girl, or his words were not true. Despite this, they checked Mike for possible involvement, but were unable to make any progress in this direction. However, the witness's story reminded of this old case, and in 2014 they decided to reopen it. At this point, DNA analysis was already actively used. The police hoped that experts would be able to discover new evidence by examining all the available things. They examined Melissa's clothing and other items, but no foreign DNA was found on them. However, there was something else among the evidence. During the examination of the body, samples were taken from under the victim's fingernails in the hope that she might have scratched her attacker. Having studied these samples, experts actually found particles of foreign skin there, which they immediately sent to the laboratory. But here another problem arose. Experts were able to extract from them the profile of an unknown man, but only a partial one. It wasn't enough to get a base hit. However, investigators did not plan to give up. Some time later, they contacted a company that was engaged in genealogy research. They studied the sample and began searching for its possible owner using available databases. This was a very difficult task, since they had to work with a partial sample, which does not make it possible to identify a person with absolute certainty. However, in the course of painstaking work, they managed to find a possible relative of the owner of the sample in the database, and soon they found one specific family with the surname McClendenin. Their main problem is the lack of a complete DNA profile with which it would be possible to prove the unconditional guilt of one of the family members. Therefore, investigators carefully studied which of them could be in Lawrence in 1988, who was suitable in age, and so on. Eventually they found two brothers, one of whom was Marvin McLean. The man lived in Alabama, but investigators learned that at the time he lived only 20 minutes away and worked as a carpenter. Moreover, while digging into Marvin's past, they learned that the man quite often came to work at the church, which was located just a few hundred meters from the very bar where Melissa was. The man also worked as a prison guard for about 30 years, but intermittently. He left this position 3 times, and 1988 was one of those breaks. The interesting finds did not end there. We found information that in those years Marvin owned an old brown van, which he drove for work. However, the man had no criminal history except for numerous traffic fines for not wearing a seat belt. Martin was also married twice, and both wives left him. The man had 2 sons from his first marriage, but he did not take an active part in their lives. Lastly, Martin was left-handed, unlike all of his close male relatives. While detectives were studying this suspect, Melissa's mother died in 2015 at the age of 70. She struggled with a serious illness for a long time and never found out who killed her daughter. After putting together all the information about Martin and checking his other relatives, detectives came to the conclusion that he was the most likely culprit. In 2021, they went to see him in Alabama for the first time and began asking him about that time period in the late 80s. Eventually, they brought up the topic of Melissa Tremblay's murder. When he was told that DNA from one of his close relatives was found on the victim's body, Martin said that his brother could be the killer. That same year, he voluntarily provided his DNA sample, but experts still could not establish a complete similarity. All that allowed us to determine the partial profile from under Melissa's nails was that Martin was either close to its owner, or that he was a killer himself. However, investigators who examined all close male relatives realized that none of them had the opportunity to commit this crime, and Martin must be responsible for it. But they also understood that without a full DNA match, it would be extremely difficult for the prosecution to convict the man. As a result, they spent another year trying to find at least some additional clues. Detectives checked on Mike, the same man the 13-year-old allegedly saw on the steps of the bar with a girl who looked like Melissa. But they came several more times to talk with Martin, asking him various questions, and in April 2022 they finally decided to arrest the man, although he continued to insist on his innocence. During the arrest, Martin uttered a rather suspicious phrase. He told one of the officers, "At least I got 20 years of my pension." Martin was 74 at the time and was sent to prison to await trial. It is noteworthy that the judge had to place him under constant guard because other prisoners quickly found out that he once worked in the prison. In the absence of a definitive DNA match from someone in Martin's family, none of his close relatives had the opportunity to commit this crime. As for distant relatives, the match with the DNA was no longer so obvious, and experts could easily see the difference. In addition, they pointed out that in 1988, Martin regularly came to the church on the same street as the bar, owned a similar van and matched the description of the witness who saw the girl next to his car. The trial began in December 2022. The man's lawyer immediately took issue with the lack of a complete DNA profile of the criminal and said that without this it would be impossible to confirm his client's guilt. After this, the lawyer invited two of his experts. One of them was a criminologist who said that from the photo of the foot she could not confirm that the killer was left-handed. The second genetics expert said that the coincidence of a partial DNA profile with one family does not exclude that this sample may also belong to distant relatives, of which there are hundreds and thousands in almost any person. Martin himself refused to speak in his own defense, and by the end of December the jury began deliberations. It took them almost a week, and on December 27 they reported that they had failed to reach a unanimous decision. Some of the jury believed that without a complete DNA sample of the criminal, Martin could not be unconditionally found guilty, and the judge was forced to declare the trial invalid. In early 2024, the prosecution said it planned to hold a retrial. Its start is scheduled for September 30, 2024. Until then he will be in prison. At the moment, he is already 76 years old, and the man suffers from many diseases, so we cannot exclude the possibility that he may not live to see the end of the new process. If the court fails to find him guilty a second time, the man may be released, and Melissa's murder will remain unanswered. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments and don't forget to like this video if you liked it.